In this lesson, we'll learn about the various Pathfinder effects available to us in the Pathfinder panel. Alright, so in the previous lesson, we walked through the various shape modes here in Illustrator's Pathfinder panel. We demonstrated those on some very simple shapes. We also explored both destructive and non-destructive workflows for using those shape modes. Now, we have here a row of Pathfinders underneath, and these are going to work just a little bit differently. So we're going to walk through those as well. Now, they do have one similar aspect to shape modes in that they have both, again, destructive and non-destructive workflows that we can use when applying these Pathfinder effects. So I tell you what, let's just zoom in here and we're going to begin looking at these. Let's go ahead and talk about the destructive workflow first, and let's go ahead and talk about this first option here. Again, you can mouse over these and you can find out what each one of these different Pathfinders is named, but right here we have our divide Pathfinder, we have a trim Pathfinder, merge, crop, outline, and minus back. So let's go ahead and just select these three shapes right here, and we're going to look and explore what exactly these various Pathfinders do. So I'm going to go ahead and hit our divide Pathfinder first here. Now, it doesn't appear that there was really any change in the shapes that we had selected, but take note here that now we have a group of objects, and this is pretty common with the Pathfinders, is that after you apply one, what you are left with is a group. Now, one other thing that's important to take note of just the Pathfinder buttons and applying them in a destructive manner just by clicking the various buttons is that they can only be applied to, well, actually they can really be applied to any combination of objects, groups, or even layers. So there's a little different way of applying these we'll talk about in just a moment, but let's explore what we just did here. We'll zoom in on this, and let's go ahead and ungroup this with a Control-Shift-G. And now we're left with the individual shapes. So if we go ahead and pull these shapes apart, what we can see that the divide Pathfinder has done is basically looked at all of the edges for the original shapes here, and it's basically divided shapes that overlap those edges. So I tell you what, let me go ahead and undo that back to our original shapes here. And we can look here at this ellipse, and we can see that it overlaps an edge right here for this square, and it also overlaps an edge right here for this square. So basically, this is kind of like a cookie cutter is being brought down on top of our shapes, and it's dividing any shapes that overlap an edge or a path of another shape. So again, applying that divide, you can see here that using our direct selection tool, we can select the individual components and move them within the group. We've got three new shapes here for that ellipse. Now again, it's also important to remember here that because we're using a destructive workflow, we can't revert back to our original shapes unless we use the undo command, the Control-Z keyboard shortcut. If we've proceeded on far enough to where we're out of undos, we can't undo back to these original shapes. So, and this is a destructive workflow. But let's go ahead and bounce on over here to this next grouping of shapes, and we'll take a look at this next Pathfinder right here. This one is the trim Pathfinder, and this one quite simply is going to take one object, the topmost object, and use it to trim away a portion of the object below it. So it works sort of like the minus front shape mode up here above. Now again, if we look at this, we again have our result is a group, but grabbing our direct selection tool, we can again pull this apart and see that basically we've removed this part of this shape that's underneath this ellipse here. Let me go ahead and undo that. Now, one important side note about the trim feature here is that basically if one of those shapes has a stroke around it, it's actually going to remove that stroke. So it will actually remove a stroke for one of the shapes here. Let's go ahead and bounce on down, and let's take a look at this next Pathfinder. This next Pathfinder is called the Merge Pathfinder. Now, this Pathfinder is going to work very similar to trim, and if we just select two objects here and merge those together, we can pull those apart and see that we've sliced away a part of the shape that was underneath. Now, the way that this Pathfinder differs from trim is when we're dealing with, let's say, we're dealing with multiple shapes here, and maybe some of them have the same color. So I tell you what, let's go ahead and pull some of these over here. Let's go ahead and drag up another copy of, actually let's drag up another copy of this ellipse and just layer it right there. So we've got two ellipses of the same color. We'll select all these here, and we'll go ahead and merge those. Now, notice what has happened here. If we take a look at this, let's go ahead and ungroup that with a Control-Shift-G and select the individual shapes. So what has happened here is Illustrator's actually combined the two shapes, or merged the two shapes that have an identical color. And if we move those up here, it's subtracted that merged shape from the two shapes that are underneath it. So it differs a little bit from the trim pathfinder in that shapes of the same color, it's going to actually merge those together. Alright, so let's go ahead and move on. The next pathfinder we're going to talk about is the crop pathfinder. So we'll go ahead and bounce down here to our next set of shapes, and I tell you what, let's go ahead and just select these two shapes right here, and let's just go ahead and run that pathfinder. So keep in mind that the ellipse is on top of that yellow square. We'll go ahead and crop that, and what you can see has happened here is the shape that was on top has been used as a boundary for the shape that's below and used to crop that shape below into its boundary. So you can see here what we're left with here is just this sliver of that yellow square right here that was inside or overlapping the ellipse. Now if you look closely here, you can see that we again have a group. Let me just go ahead and drag that to the side so you can see that. Because my edges are revealed, you can see here that we still have the edge of that ellipse here. Let's go ahead and ungroup that and see what happens. Let's go ahead and drag that apart. And you can see here that we have our sliver of that yellow square, and we select here, we've also got a piece of the ellipse. So we've got the other part of the ellipse. Now, let's go ahead and just click on this here. You can see that that is basically a shape or a path that has no color attributes at all applied to it. So if we wanted to, we could always come up here, maybe pick a color, and apply it to that particular shape that's left over. So you can see that we do have a little bit of leftovers in using that crop function. Let me just go ahead and undo that a few times. And I tell you what, let's go ahead and take a look at the next pathfinder. This next pathfinder is a little different. And to be honest, I can't say that I've honestly used it a whole lot. It's actually called Outline. So we'll go ahead and jump over here, and let's just zoom in on this very first example here, and we'll just select all those shapes and hit this Outline button right here. Now, take a look at what has happened here. We still have all of our edges selected, but it looks like our shapes are gone. Well, they're actually not gone. Let me just go ahead and deselect those. Now, I don't know if you can see that because they are very, very faint. So what has happened here is Illustrator has reduced those shapes into only their edges. Now you can come in here and again see that this is a group. So let's go ahead and we can either go into isolation mode or just ungroup this. I'll just go ahead and ungroup it with a Control-Shift-G. Switch over to my direct selection tool by hitting the A keyboard shortcut, and now notice what we can do is we can select the individual segments of these shapes. So we've broken this up. Now if I were to go ahead and maybe just use my direct selection tool, obviously we're not going to move that entire shape. We're just selecting this segment of the shape right here. Let me just go ahead and grab it with my selection tool, and I'll go ahead and pull these apart. So you can see here that each of these shapes has been split into segments based on where it was overlapping other shapes. So you can see here, let's go ahead and just take a look here. You can see here we've got most of our square, but we've got a portion missing where that ellipse was overlapping it. So again, that is the Outline pathfinder, and we've got one other pathfinder left here, and let's go ahead and just select these shapes here. Actually, we can even select all three of them for this pathfinder. This one is actually called the minus back pathfinder. And, you know, that may sound kind of familiar because we have a minus front shape mode. And actually, it works in a very similar manner, only it's going to subtract the back objects from the frontmost objects. So we can select these three objects here and go ahead and hit that minus back pathfinder. You can see all we're left with is that sliver that was not overlapping one of those two squares. So you can see here it's not necessarily taking the backmost object, but every object behind the frontmost here. Alright, great. Now we've walked through each one of the pathfinders and we've looked at destructive ways of applying them to our artwork, but let's talk about non-destructive ways of modifying these shapes. Now, if you remember the shape modes, we were able to hold down our Alt key and click on each shape mode and apply those as a compound shape. Now, we can't do that with pathfinders. They work a little bit differently. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to go ahead and grab my appearance panel. Let's go ahead and pull this up so it's right under our pathfinder panel here. That works pretty well. Now, what I'm looking at here is the Effects button right here. Now, we can get to the Effects through the Appearance panel just by clicking on that, or we can get to Effects up here through the drop-down menu at the top of our screen. But either way, what we're looking at is the Pathfinder option here. Now, notice there are several options here under this Pathfinder flyout. Now, if you remember over in the Pathfinder panel, we only had 6 different Pathfinders, but there's obviously more than 6 here. So we've got a few Pathfinders that aren't available in the Pathfinder panel. Now, let me go ahead and just select some artwork here before we get into those. Let's go ahead and select some artwork here, and let's go ahead and come over to our Effects Pathfinder, and let's go ahead and select this Let's select this Add option. Now, this Add option is one that is not available to us in the Pathfinder under Pathfinders, but this is very, very similar to the Unite shape mode that is above the Pathfinders. So I'll go ahead and select Add here. Now, this is another important thing to consider when looking at Pathfinders through the Appearance panel. Pathfinders through the Appearance panel or through the Effects menu are a little bit different than the Pathfinder menu up here. Basically, these Pathfinders can only be applied to groups, layers, and text objects. So if you don't choose one of those objects, you're going to get this kind of error message. And you can see here that I have all three of those loose objects selected. Let's go ahead and cancel that. Let's go ahead and group these together with a Control-G, or you can go to Object and Group right there. And with that selected, let's come in here and reapply that Add Pathfinder. Now check this out. This is actually pretty cool because what we've done is we have basically merged these three shapes together into one shape, just like as if we had used the Unite shape mode. Now keep in mind that's also inherited the topmost appearance attributes of this topmost object. Now we also have visible edges here, so we haven't permanently made this change. This looks kind of like we have a compound shape selected. But look up here, we have a group selected. Right here and right here it says group. We can ungroup this and we'll revert back to our original objects. Let me go ahead and undo that. Or we can come into this group, double clicking on it to isolate it. We can select each of those individual objects within this group and we can modify them just like so, just like we were inside a compound shape. Let me show you something else that's really cool about applying these Pathfinders as effects through the Appearance panel. Let's go ahead and select this shape. Notice here that we have this Add option right here in our Appearance panel. This is going to allow us to hide or reveal this effect just simply by clicking on that little eyeball right there. So you can see here that that can be turned on and off on the fly really quickly. Now let's go ahead and notice here that the Add word looks sort of like a hyperlink. We can actually click that. And there are actually a few options that we can go into under these Pathfinder options. Now several of these are going to be grayed out because this dialog box is going to be used for all of the various Pathfinders that we can find through the Effects menu. Now we can come in here and we can look and we have our Intersect. Remember, Intersect was actually a shape mode right here. We have our Exclude, also a shape mode, and we have Subtract. Now Subtract is going to work a lot like minus front, but we also have all these Pathfinders that were right here in our Pathfinder panel. Now we also have even a couple more down here that are kind of new in regards to color mixing. We have Hard Mix, Soft Mix, and we also have Trap. Now I won't get in too much into all these, but this Trap option is basically something that's there to help you plan for misregistrations on a printing press. So we won't get into those three too much, but we can come in here and select any of these. And notice here that the effect behind is actually changing. If we wanted to merge those, or if we wanted to exclude those, maybe we wanted to crop those. So you can see here we can preview that just simply by checking our preview box here in the Pathfinder options. So with that said, thinking about making non-destructive changes to our shapes, let me just cancel that here back to the Add Pathfinder. It's really up to you. Do you prefer to work more with the shape modes and compound shapes, or do you work here with the Appearance panel as sort of your central location for making adjustments to your shapes? I know that this is a great panel and a very powerful panel here in Illustrator CS5, and I prefer to use this panel a lot myself. Now, we've walked through all of the shape modes. We've also taken a look at all of the Pathfinders, so we've fully explored this Pathfinder panel. Now, we're just about ready to jump in and begin looking at some practical ways that we can apply both shape modes and Pathfinders to a project, but there's actually one more tool we should probably talk about that Adobe has introduced with Illustrator CS5 that really goes hand in hand with a lot of the basic operations in the Pathfinder panel, and that's the Shape Builder tool. So, in the next lesson, we're going to pick up where we're leaving off here, and we're going to learn about the Shape Builder tool.